Have you spent years making sure your buried secrets of your life stay buried? I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and thanks so much for listening to the Parable Podcast. We are thrilled to collaborate again with the Baton Pass as they head into their fall event season called Brave Enough. If you haven't heard about the Baton Pass before, they exist to empower overcomers to share their stories in a powerful way that bring hope, healing, and radical restoration. This mission really connects to what the Parable Podcast is all about. And for the past few years, I've hosted some of their events. I'm on their leadership team, and I've seen the impact of what is happening in the hearts of so many women. It is awesome. So joining me today is one of their Arizona team members, Amanda Bates, who shares about what happens when buried secrets come to the surface.
I'm sorry I was unhealthy. I'm sorry that my choices bled into you and affected you in this way. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry for that. But then it created that space for us to go on and have relationship past that. And that was one thing I had to learn. My choices and the stuff that happened didn't void the things that God did. He still showed up.
Here's my conversation with Amanda Bates. Well, it is such a joy when a mutual friend tells you like, hey, I have this girl I'd love for you to interview. She is such a joy. She referred to you, Amanda, as like the light of her life. Like you just bring such joy. And so I was like, of course, who wouldn't be down to talk to somebody like that? So Amanda, that is you. Welcome to the Parable Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, we are so excited to kick off our first episode of our fall collaboration with the Baton Pass. Their theming of events is called Brave Enough. And so we're going to hear some stories over the next couple of weeks. And Amanda is our first to be hanging out with us on the Parable Podcast. So we're grateful you're here. Amanda, I'd love to know, how did you get connected to the Baton Pass?
So I got connected with Angela, our mutual friend, where she invited me to this. She's like, hey, come hang out with me. It's just a bunch of like ladies hanging out, sharing stories. And I'm like, okay, that sounds intimidating.
Yes.
That sounds like, for me, I was like, oh man, that's super intimidating. And I was like in a really broken place at that time, in a healing place, I guess you can say, in that journey. And that's kind of part of my parable story. But I was really in a broken place there and really coming out of some healing spaces. So the first time I went into a Baton Pass, it was the first time that I actually sat amongst a group of women. It was so comfortable, and it just felt like community, and being able to have the space to be able to share stories and hearing these ladies' stories in such a vulnerable setting. And it was also out of like church walls too. It was very much where we can have community outside of that. So that's the start of the journey. And then after that, I was kind of sold. Whatever you need, Angela, I'm here. Like whatever it is that you need, I want to partner with you. So we started a partnership, and we started, really connecting in that. And that's where the journey started.
So great to have you a part of the leadership team out in the Phoenix area. So the Baton Pass is in a couple different areas, and Phoenix is one of them. So have you always lived in the Phoenix area, or is this like a new space for you?
So I'm kind of an Arizona native, but not really.
Okay.
I was born in Texas, but I brought here when I was 3. So that's a really hard question. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I grew up here, but I was born in Texas.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
You can't take the Texan out of the heart, okay?
So Amanda, what would you say is like your passion in this season of your life?
My passion in this season right now has really been empowering women to share their stories.
Okay.
And not just like the stories that are nice to hear, but stories that are deeper than that. Stories that we oftentimes keep hidden because we're afraid of the shame that's attached to that, or afraid of what other people are going to think or feel some sort of way when we share those stories. Absolutely. So really just being able to expose women and encourage women in a space to be able to share parts of their stories. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to do that in ministry world, partnering with Baton Pass, and also with what I do for work with survivors of war. So it is really cool to be able to connect those things together.
Did you say survivors of war? That's what you...
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Okay, so I work with survivors of war. It started out as a veteran-only specific ministry that has kind of expanded since then. God continues to expand our tent pegs. And we have multiple modalities that help heal our veterans and their families, but also our survivors. So we've kind of taken on this road now God has us on is survivors of all walks of life, domestic violence, sex trafficking, people that are coming out of foster care, aging out of that. And addiction is huge right now in our space. So we are being able to minister to these individuals in a way, give them Jesus, but also allowing them to use our different modalities and different ministries within. We have our God's Country ministry where we actually take groups and individuals out to God's country. And those like therapy office conversations are happening around the campfire where we get to like open up with one another in the middle of God's country. And there's just so much healing that can happen outside of there and kind of puts walls down for people. So I get to kind of connect all the things and all the passions in that. And
I know that that's your passion, like you finding people's story. But how did you get connected to veterans? Have you had somebody serve in your family? Have you served?
No, I have not served.
Okay.
And I always get asked that question. My husband has not served. He actually was the one that ended that in his family. But it was honestly within this whole my parable story, God kind of led me into a space to be able to start school. And so I went back to school to get my degree in psychology and counseling. And in that process, I had to interview someone in the community that was making a difference. And that's how I got connected with Shannon Dunnigan. He's the founder of Survivors of War. Sat down, interviewed with him, literally a 45-minute conversation turned into 2 hours. And I shut my computer and told my husband I wanted to quit my job and I wanted to just serve with them because of what they were doing in the community and what they were, because it really is a niche and where they need more. And there isn't a lot offered for the whole family unit. And that was my heart to minister to the whole family unit. So that's kind of like in a roundabout crazy way, kind of how that happened, but God was all over it. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. My husband actually just came on board with us as well. So it was really cool. God's been really redeeming a lot of things that we had said no to.
Amanda, I think that is so true what you're sharing about how it comes and surrounds like the whole family or just even like friends and like how they journey through life together. We don't realize that the baggage that we bring that transfers to everyone around us and how we interact with each other. Can you share a little bit like what your family was like growing up and just like how that kind of like changed and grew over the years for you and how you expressed your faith and ministry, what you've learned from that?
My family growing up, we were a hot mess express for sure. I definitely grew up in broken pieces, broken home in that, but my mom was a single mom for a long time, did her best with what she was able to do, but it was always centered. We always had God centered in our world. And whatever situation we were in those different seasons, she always had us in church. It was just what we did. I was the type of kid that went to church on Wednesdays, on Sundays, whenever the doors were open, we were going. I went to the camps, on the mission trips, like all the things. So it really like shifted my whole journey into starting in ministry at a very young age, even out on missions field and whatnot. But then God really opened up the door for me to come on full time into a ministry setting. And so that was what I did right after high school. And it was like, okay, God, like this is what we're doing. So I was able to serve in ministry for such a long time. But in that season, it was really cool because I was working with young people during that time and being able to connect with a lot of the hurts and a lot of the stuff that they had gone through. Girls that were coming out of homes that were fatherless homes. I had kids that were going through different addictions. I had kids that were struggling in different areas of just knowing their identity and their worth. That was one of the biggest passions I've had all the way through that's kind of strung through is helping individuals find their worth and their identity in who Christ is. So that's kind of in growing up in brokenness, but also being exposed to God at such a young age and experiencing him in such a real way really targeted my life journey in that.
Yeah. When you had used those words earlier, like redemption and restoration. And I mean, after recording with so many people, I think that is just a picture that God keeps reminding me, like he will use these broken pieces, those hot mess express families for his glory. Like there is so much good good. Because sometimes we just wonder, like, why did I have to experience that? And not that he's just like, yes, I'm glad you experienced that. But he's like, you know what? I can't control that, but I'm going to use it for so much more. Amanda, I'd love for you to share one of your parable stories that you have today. And we're going to kind of circle back and wonder how were you brave enough through that? So please go ahead and share your story with us.
I love that you had just mentioned redemption and restoration in that, because that is kind of the center of my whole parable story. So God is so good with that. But it really begins in a really low part of my life. It was when my marriage of 8 years completely crumbled. It was, and that the crumbling was because of a long history of secrets. Secrets was the undercurrent of our whole relationship. Everything from mine and my ex's addictions to my ex-husband's emotional affairs, even down to an abortion that we buried, to finally my affair that led to the ultimate explosion and end of our marriage and a 14-year relationship. It really was years of buried secrets and unhealed traumas. And the affair also ending not only my marriage, but ended my time in ministry at that time. So it was one night where everything just kind of exploded. Everything surfaced and it was messy. It was like a bomb literally went off. It was messy. It was complicated. It left so many casualties. It was just a nightmare of a night, but it really was the first time in years that I was able to be honest. And all that I was keeping secret and in the dark just began spilling out. And that began a journey for me to really be brave enough to be honest with myself, to be honest with my family, and to be honest with God as to where I really was then, because I was very unhealthy at that point in my life. It was where I learned to be brave enough to heal and taking those steps forward to heal because I was so unhealthy. I feel like life happens and we just kind of keep trucking along and sometimes never really allowing God to truly heal those hurts that kind of happen along the way. And sometimes even things that happen to us and the traumas we try to bury so deep and hoping that they're never going to resurface. And that was me. I just kind of kept trucking along. When hurts came through that season, I just kept burying them. I didn't feel safe enough, didn't even know how to walk out the healing with God or with others. And I was supposed to have it all together. At least that was the lie that I bought into being in ministry. I had to have it all together. So I carefully almost like curated that perfect life narrative through social media and through the people that were around me and the relationships, that when that bomb exploded, it was like shock and awe in that. But it was that night when truth really surfaced, I lost a lot of things. I lost my family. I lost my job. I lost my church. I lost close friends. And I thought I lost my purpose in that. But what I gained was God. That kicked off this wilderness season that really followed. And it was the first time God and I got to sit face to face and duke out all the things that I had kept buried for so long. I was alone by world standards, but really I was just being brave enough to begin walking out this healing journey with God. And I'm really figuring out healing is a funny thing because sometimes as humans, we just avoid it because it's uncomfortable. Healing really is uprooting the weeds in our lives to keep us from the beauty that God has in our story. It is when we're sitting face to face with God in our hurt, in our sin, we find this root healing. But we have to be brave enough to go there. We have to be brave enough to pull those weeds out. We have to be brave enough to sit in the uncomfortable for a minute. And that really was that season, just that whole time just really kickstarted that for me. But that night specifically, God, in the chaos and all the stuff that was happening, God whispered so tenderly to my heart, I am Elroi. And I was like, oh gosh, okay, I am Elroi. Elroi, the God who sees me. That night I didn't really have the bandwidth to even go there. There was so many other things happening and all the chaos, but it was something that continued to tug on my heart and God continued to keep bringing it to mind. I am Elroi. So I sat with him. And when I started that real root healing journey, and I sat across from God and said, okay, God, speak to me. And in this, I found the story of Hagar, which I had read a million times. But she's an Egyptian woman who worked for a barren woman named Sarah. Sarah decided to have a child by asking her husband to sleep with Hagar. Then Sarah mistreated pregnant Hagar to the point that she ran away to the desert. Now, if I'm being totally honest honest, my first thought was like, yes, I am not the first dysfunctional Lifetime drama episode. Thank you, Jesus. It was just that very sobering moment where I'm like, yes, I am human. Okay. Like there is life that happens and we make choices. Then he really began to speak to me. You know, God sends an angel to encourage Hagar, and we find these words next. It says in Genesis, therefore, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. She also said, have I truly seen the one who sees me? And man, I resonated with her story because in that moment, I had the choice, the urge to run or the urge to know the God who sees me in that moment. And it was different that night. In our lowest moments, God sees us. That was sobering for me. God saw my pain. He saw my cries in that. He was never unaware of anything that I was going through. And it wasn't like he was promising to really fix all the things. He was just saying, I see you. And he also saw the bigger picture outside of what I was currently facing. And that night just really opened up the floodgates of hidden sins and hidden traumas and hidden secrets all really brought out to light. And it was because God loved me too much to keep me there in that unhealthy place. And he sees us, but it's up to us to step out and to be brave enough to heal in that and be brave enough to want that healing and do that deep healing. So yeah, it was a messy time, but God's handprints have been all over it. Through that and really seeking some deep healing in that journey, even from stuff that I never really wanted to think about. Childhood traumas that came up that I've healed through in this season. God's had me in those spaces. So it's been really a really tough space to be, but it was one that brought so much healing to me, to our family in those spaces.
Yeah. You know, you talked about at the top of the podcast, the reason you got connected and you were interested in the baton pass is that women were sharing stories, but it was also a little like intimidating. You're like, wait, what? What's going? How deep are we going? And I think that is so true of so many women. And when you were sharing about, you know, you had all these hidden things that were resting right underneath the surface and you were working so hard to make sure that no one would see any dysfunction, any hidden lies, anything that was there. Talk to me a little bit about what Amanda was going through before it burst, of like holding all of that tension and just hoping no one ever finds out.
Man, I felt the weight of the world always and just felt very alone, very lonely in that season, trying to grasp at anything that was going to make sense to me in that. And even like battling that, knowing the things that I was doing wasn't right. And really in that tug of war of trying to fill this void up with other things and not realizing and not even being in a space to be able to be honest with God and even have relationships that were closest to me at that time that I could really be like, hey, this is what's really going on. Like there really wasn't anyone in my life at that time that really knew all the layers of the stuff during that season because we really did keep it under wraps. But in that, I carried the weight of that daily and the war of that in my heart daily, where I felt so grieved because it wasn't anything I ever expected in those seasons. And the things that I went through in my previous marriage were very heartbreaking and heart-wrecking, that it took a toll emotionally. So I was even got to a space of just being very hardened almost and just kind of going through the motions, you know, just being able to kind of push through and just go through the motions and, you know, hoping that at some point something would break in that and I would snap out of it. I don't even know. It was very, very lost in that season.
Yeah, I think that's a good word, lost. And sometimes we can't even like pinpoint what it is because there's so much input and also trauma, things that we're just like mental load that we're dealing with every day. We don't even recognize everything that goes into our brain and what we have to process. Amanda, you had said that after the break of this moment, you were in this wilderness season where you duked it out with God. And I love that you said that because sometimes people are so scared of like, oh, I got to tread lightly. You know, can God handle my emotions? And yes, he can.
Yes, he can.
And so, there's just like the frustration. And also he knows that we're human. We've obviously messed up from the very beginning of time. Hello, Adam and Eve.
Yes.
And, it just keeps going. That's the repeated story of the Bible over and over. And yet he loves us and he met you in that place. Share a little bit about how that season changed and what God started doing in your heart.
So that wilderness season really was just that. It was me and God in the wilderness. It was even to the point where I lived 45 minutes away out of town. And it was that drive. I had to take my kids to and from school. So I had a 45-minute drive there and a 45-minute drive back. So I spent a lot of time in the car, literally driving through the desert to get back home and back and forth. And it really was time where God and I really duked out some stuff, where it was getting real with God, with the things that I was frustrated with, the things that I was hurt by, the things that I chose and the choices that I made that just grieved my heart. And it was during those seasons where God really it was like he just leveled out ground. He's like, girl, we're just going to level it all out. We're going to work it. We're going to pull all of the weeds out in that. And it was really difficult at first for me because I didn't want to feel the things. I didn't want to go there. Even in that process, like I said, childhood trauma started coming out. And I was like, I don't want to think. I haven't thought about this in years. We're not thinking about that. God was like, no, we need to heal this. We need to go there and heal this. And it was like, okay, God, so I need to do that. And during that season, God had me start writing, and I started blogging, which was so not in my character. And actually, I had several people throughout my life say, writing was just not a thing for you. You're just not gifted in that. Don't do it. I'm like, okay. So I believed that for years. So I just started blogging and just what God was doing in my heart, how we were really healing through some of those areas. And in that time, God really was capturing my heart in that healing process, but also restoring relationship with him and restoring my faith in him and restoring that he is that safe space that we can go there with. And then as he began restoring our relationship, it was like he opened up doors. I started getting involved in another church setting, and he started opening up doors for me to connected with other women. And it was sitting in different women's ministries where women were vulnerable and telling their stories. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she just said that from the platform. Holy cow. Okay, I'm not the only one. God started really revealing to me, you are seen in this. And not only are you seen, but there's other women that need to hear this.
Absolutely.
Need to hear the healing. And shame just really started coming off because I was in a season where shame blanketed me. It was from everything that, the failed marriage to the affairs, to the abortion, to the stuff that happened, to the addiction. All that stuff was just a blanket of shame that I wore for so long. And it was in that season, God started peeling that off. And I started putting on that coat of righteousness, that coat of worth, of belong. I am his daughter, and learning what that looked like in such a tangible way. And just being able to link up with other ladies and in community and really restoring even those relationships, restoring relationships that I have with women in that, because during that season, I didn't have close relationships because I kept everyone really at a distance, but it really was God started bringing community around me. In those seasons, brought people like Angela into my life where it was hey, yeah, that is messy, but it's so awesome that God's brought you here. And it was man, okay, Lord.
Amanda, you had mentioned earlier when you were sharing your story about there was a loss of the family, there was a loss of job, there was a loss of church, and there was a loss of purpose. Looking back now, in the midst of that, you were saying the shame is eventually, it's coming off in layers. How can you see now that God has redeemed those areas, has taught you something about to experience loss and what it means now?
Yeah, to experience also what it means now. Honestly, it really was, I had to really come to a space where I was being honest of really giving it everything back to God, because all those things weren't mine anyways. And for so long I was functioning in my own strength and not in God's anyhow. But it was really a really interesting time in that season where God had to level out all of the relationships and all of the situations I was in and really take me out of unhealthy situations. Because now that I look back, some of the friendships that I was in weren't even friendships. It was me just giving. There was never any exchange of friendship. And that was very toxic for me. And I had to be taken out of that. Even in the space I was in my work and in the church I was in, there was very unhealthy things that were happening there. And and God had already took me out of that. And in that time, not only did he take me out of those spaces, but then he also brought people that walked in that time of life with me that were hurt by various people in that or hurt by various situations. And it was like I was able to help bring peace into their lives in that, where it was, I can say, I'm sorry that the church did this to you or you felt this way. I'm sorry for that. And really being able to minister to their hearts in that. But then also it was a time where God mended a lot of different relationships, because my prayer after everything exploded was, God, mend the relationships that need to be mended. Bring them to me, because I don't need to seek them out. I only want what you want in this. And there had been relationships from some of the students that I had ministered with that we've reconciled in that, where we've spent time, and I was able to go before them and be like, hey, I'm sorry I was unhealthy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my choices bled into you and affected you in this way. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry for that. But then it created that space for us to go on and have relationship past that, where now I champion one girl that I had since middle school. She's off in ministry on her own as a youth pastor, and being able to see like that my purpose wasn't lost in that. Like I wasn't too big to be able to be like, to stop what God did. It wasn't like, you know, my choice voided everything. And that was one thing I had to learn. Like my choices and the stuff that happened didn't void the things that God did. He still showed up for her in the spaces. And it was a really sobering reality when he invited me to come to her when she got licensed as pastor. And I was like so overwhelmed, because I got to minister to her in middle school, high school, and even in the mess, like God continued to work through. So those type of relationships continued and amongst a lot of different people in life, where I thought, man, like that was voided. That was a voided time. No, God's like, you don't have that much power, girl. Like not voided.
And you just don't know like what effects have on so many people. I mean, you're able to see that relationship with this young woman, but I mean, who knows like what freeing that happened in other people's lives. Like sometimes we just don't know. And so that's so cool to think like God is still like working and doing, and we are just still doing our own thing. We have no idea.
100%.
It's so beautiful. I would love to ask you, you know, you talked about all these hiding of secrets. Now that you work through that, it was exposed. Is that still a struggle for you? How have you managed that moving forward?
No, it is not a struggle for me, honestly, at this now. It has been something that I really, because I lived so unhealthy for so long. And it was kind of like this reoccurring theme, not even like with my relationship with my ex-husband, but it was within like my family unit. Like if we didn't talk about it, it didn't happen. Like there were things that happened when we were kids that we just didn't talk about. And we kind of kept hidden. And, you know, I grew up in the idea of whatever happens in our house stays in our house type of thing. But now it is very freeing to be on the other side of that, where I kind of err on the other side, where it's, if stuff starts coming up or I start feeling a certain way or something starts happening or there's situations that happen. I am remarried now, and my husband and I are in this space of kind of in our no sugarcoat era in that, where it's like we are just going to be open and honest and vulnerable. And even in the season after that followed, it really has helped us to be able to be transparent with the people in our community. We're going through something and we're going to pull in the people closest to us to be like, hey, I'm going to be real. This is what's going on. Like exposing it all, because I know what the enemy does when we keep things secret. I've been there, lived it. Don't want that postcard t-shirt ever again. Not happening. And just being able to be real with the community that I have, and trusting the people that God's placed in my life to navigate me through that, and really call me up, because there's sometimes that I have to be real and honest, and they're like, oh no, we're going to call you up in this, and God's going to grow you in this season in that. But it really has been really cool. And God opened up just that opportunity, even with me blogging, where people started commenting and like messaging back like, oh, that's my story. And it's like, okay, that's like, God is so good. Like, let's walk through that a little bit, and being able to even encourage others to live in that raw, authentic you. Like God loves you, period. Doesn't matter about all the things hidden. He like wants to work out those hidden things, you know, and there's no shame in that.
I think what you just said, like he wants to work those out. And when you were saying about the blog and people commenting, I think so easily we can live in isolation, right? We just think it's only happening to us. Like nobody has ever experienced it. And that is the lie that, Satan wants to embed in our hearts and our souls and just like have us like be held into this certain like spot for the rest of our life. I would be curious for the woman who feels like she is just hiding or she feels lost. How would you encourage her to step out, to be brave enough? Because that first step is really hard because you just said it exploded everything. So like, be like, do I really want that? How would you talk to her about that?
Honestly, it's just taking one step, finding that one person or that one community that you can just be genuine with. If you don't have that person, I'm totally available because there are those people I believe in our lives that are going to sit in the mud with us. They're going to sit in the messy with us for a minute. Even in our mess, they're going to be the ones that are going to love on you and plug you into a community where you can find healing in that. But really just taking the step to really be honest, like with yourself, with, this is stuff that I really need to work on. And this is junk that I don't want in my life. And being honest with God, like, God, how can we heal out of this? And really taking the step to be vulnerable. And I know that's like way easier said than done because I'm not one to want to open up to, just anyone. It takes time, but just even if it is just meeting some friend, a close friend for coffee, but always making sure we have people in our lives that are going to not be afraid to call us up and not be afraid to sit in the messy with us. That was something that was missing for a really long time because when my whole world exploded and I thought I had friends, I didn't. And it was like very sobering moment to realize, oh, I have no one that's going to sit here with me. But in those moments, God really did heal that in me and then brought me into a community where I was able to be that person for maybe someone else in that.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier that, when you are healing, when you're walking through this, it is uncomfortable. It is messy. You're pulling up all of these roots. And I just think about that. Not that I do this all the time. I don't like pulling up roots outside. No. It's not fun, right?
No.
Nobody's like, yes, root time. But I mean, the same thing goes for us internally. It's like we have to like pull those things out. And sometimes that root goes really deep. Like, and if you don't get it, it's going to keep coming back. So Amanda, I would just be curious, as you are pulling up all of these roots, it is it's a long process. When we go back and think like, if I could erase some of those roots, if I could just say like, oh, I wish this didn't happen. Would you do that? Or as hard as it was, are you grateful that this was a really crappy time in my life, but I am so grateful for these experiences now?
To be honest, I don't think I would erase anything in that. Yeah. I think that all of the things that have brought me to this point have brought me to a whole healed Amanda in that. With knowing my worth in Christ and knowing whose I am and knowing the purposes that God's placed in me. Yeah. And also knowing that my story can be a catalyst for someone else. As uncomfortable as it was, as in any of the seasons of my life, as comfortable as those seasons were. And even as I was pulling out the weeds and working through those hurts, it was really realizing like being vulnerable and honest about this story, about this piece of my story can really maybe help my sister or my friend or my neighbor or that girl that is just going to stumble across the podcast or stumble across the blog and read that and say, oh, wow, I'm not alone.
Absolutely. I love the word catalyst because it really it starts from just something that we maybe don't even think is like that meaningful or we don't even realize is happening and it just blooms. And that's one of the things that I love about the Baton Pass and these events and different resources that they provide. It gives a starting point to somebody who is hiding, who doesn't feel brave enough. And it says, oh yeah, like there's something beyond this. So we're grateful that you were on the team in Arizona. Thank you so much for being a part of that. And also just sharing your story. This isn't fun to drudge up like those feelings, but what you just said, like, that he has redeemed and restored that. If people wanted to get connected to you, how can they do that?
You can connect with me through Instagram. You can always email me, and you can visit my blog too.
All of Amanda's information will be in today's show notes. And if you happen to be in the Phoenix area, we would love to see you on October 26th. It's a Saturday. Angela and all of the team out there, they do such an excellent job. And so we hope you have enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Amanda's story is really the heart of what the Baton Pass is all about. That through stories being shared, the chains of secrets and hiding that not so perfect life can be shared, and it allows women to have a divine connection with him. I'm grateful to partner with the Baton Pass for the next few episodes so that we can all have this brave enough aspect in our lives. We would love to see you at the Arizona event on October 26th. I am not going to be there, but Amanda, Angela, and their whole team will. It is a beautiful space, and I am looking forward to the day that I can head out to Arizona and sit with all these new friends. To connect with Amanda or the Baton Pass, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time together today. Number 1, what have you lost in the past? Maybe a job, relationship, family member, church, that you can now be grateful that it happened. I'd love for you to journal about that. Number 2, in your heart of hearts, what have you buried that you don't want anyone to know about? I know this is a tough one. So you can either say this to yourself, you can write it down and throw it away. You can tell this to a safe friend, but truly isolation and keeping things to ourselves is one of Satan's greatest tactics in our life. It makes us feel shameful, and it makes us want to run and hide. This is our first step, is by speaking it out, that we release the power that these secrets have on our life. So I would encourage you, as hard as it is, and maybe that's only just announcing it to yourself. What is that for you today? If you are looking for more information on the Baton Pass, or you'd like to hear more stories about some of the women, we have a whole list available of everybody that we have had a conversation with from the Baton Pass. There's a playlist listed in our show notes or on YouTube, and I'd love for you to check that out. Also, a huge shout out to my gifted husband, Eric, for his editing expertise. That is going to do it for today. I'm grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how God uncovers the secrets for our own redemption. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.